Welcome to our community panel on tagging taxonomies. Before we kick things off, I just wanted to let you know that today's session will be recorded and it'll be emailed to you within around 24 hours. So you can rewatch the session whenever you'd like. By way of introduction, I'm Liz. I'm in the marketing team here at Dovetail, and I'm joined by my fellow Dovetailer, Chloe, who's our PM for the analysis part of the Dovetail product. So we'll be around to help you with anything you need throughout the session. So jumping into the topic at hand, tagging taxonomies. Recently, we've spoken to a fair amount of researchers about building and maintaining tagging taxonomies, and the feedback has overwhelmingly been that it's not one size fits all. It appears that people's approach is heavily dependent on certain variables. So this could include what type of research they're doing, what they're trying to understand with that research, what timeline they're driving towards, who they might be collaborating with, and there's many, many more variables. So what we decided to do is to open the floor to the community and facilitate a conversation around different approaches. So we've managed to bring together a panel of researchers from different organizations who will be providing an insight into their particular approach to tagging and taxonomies. And then towards the end of the session, we'll be fielding any questions that you may have. So make sure you post them in the chat throughout, and I'll aim to seed them through during the panel, during the Q&A portion. If we happen to have too many questions to answer in the session, we'll continue the conversation in the events channel of the Dovetail Slack community. And I'll just post a link to that for you to join in case you're not already a member. So yeah, I think we could kick things off with a little spotlight from Katherine. Katherine is a senior UX researcher at Gartner, and she'll be talking us through her approach today. So over to you, Katherine.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, it's nice to be here. Thankful for Dovetail for putting this together because I always like to learn from other people as well. So I'm excited to also hear what everyone has to say. A little bit of background in me and sort of the environment that I've been working in. So I, up until recently, have been a UX research team of one, and I work with a handful of designers and product managers. And so I think because of that, I was able to sort of single-handedly invent my taxonomy and build it myself. I didn't have like a big team to kind of bring with me or to have to collaborate on the taxonomy with. So I think that's like one big factor at play in terms of how our taxonomy evolved. And the product that I work on, when I joined, there was already like an established set of products, and we were sort of rebuilding certain products, like basically rebuilding them in a newer and better way and retiring the old ones. So sort of in between, like it was a new product, but not really a new product. So that kind of informed a lot of the types of research we were doing as well. We weren't doing a ton of discovery research. We were doing a little bit to try and kind of make improvements where we could. But for the most part, it was a lot of like usability research, like needs gathering, but nothing really hugely foundational at the time that I was making the taxonomy. So our taxonomy actually started before we even started using Dovetail. It was a way of categorizing a lot of the feedback that we would get from our account managers, from our customer success sort of coworkers, people who were talking with our clients day in and day out, and hearing about, different issues clients were facing or points of confusion or questions, things like that. So it evolved really organically as a way of just categorizing that feedback so we could understand sort of which themes or which issues were most prominent and sort of track how those, how themes were changing over time, essentially, whether things were becoming a bigger problem or were becoming less of a problem over time. So eventually, in this sort of bottom-up way, we eventually built this huge universal taxonomy, and we were actually tracking all of this feedback and doing all the tagging in this big Excel sheet, which was an absolute nightmare. So at that point, we started using Dovetail, which was, and I'm not being paid to say this, but it was like a huge game changer for us because it makes managing the taxonomy way easier. And kind of the way we implement it for us is the universal taxonomy became this extension. So every project that we have is sort of hooked up to this universal taxonomy. And the taxonomy it's really, really wide ranging. It's meant to capture everything that anyone could possibly say about the product. So we have sort of one section about like the actual data that our product shows, since it's sort of like a dashboard product. We have a whole section on like user needs for the different types of roles or different types of sort of professionals who use our product. We have a whole section on like the search experience, the export experience, a section on like things people have said about our competitors. It really contains like lots of different topics, which I'm happy to go into later if there's questions about. And the one piece of advice I would give to anyone building a taxonomy, like if a universal taxonomy, I should say, one you're hoping to kind of reuse over time, is expect it to change. I think for our taxonomy, the first sort of iteration of it was probably 3 years ago. And at least once a year over the past 3 years, I've kind of had to revisit parts of the taxonomy and either combine certain tags, retire tags, split tags apart when there's like a lot of things being tagged to an issue and it becomes clear, like really this is kind of 2 or 3 more granular issues. So it's all, and like I said, because I was the only researcher at the time, it was really easy for me to kind of do that audit whenever I needed to. So that's my biggest takeaway, is just like, it will not be done. Like your first iteration will not be your last iteration, and there won't ever be a last iteration. It'll just sort of never be finished. But that's the beauty of it. And when you use something like Dovetail, again, not being paid to say this, it's like really easy to change it and evolve it over time, much easier than what we were doing in Excel previously. So yeah, I think the other huge benefit of using a universal taxonomy like we do is that regardless of the source of whatever data you're looking at, it all gets sort of unified in one place. So whether the information came from feedback, whether it came from interviews, whether it was qualitative responses to a survey, it all gets tagged in the same taxonomy. And so if you click on a tag in that taxonomy, it sort of unites things from all these different sources and just gives sort of a broader view on sort of what people are thinking or what we're hearing from our users. So yeah, the universal taxonomy gets used for anything that's sort of an ever-present theme. We do also have what I call project-specific tags, which are essentially like let's say we're doing usability testing on a new feature, and it's like we're not sure if we're going to build that feature yet, or we're not sure if that feature is going to look like it will when we actually make it live for people. Those become like any themes we notice in the course of that usability testing becomes a tag in a sort of project-specific tag, because it's not finalized enough to make it into the universal tag. Once we actually build the feature and do push it live, then we make a new tag in the universal taxonomy for that content, because it's sort of like official. But anything that's sort of pre-code, I guess you could say, kind of lives in its own little space, so that it's not junking up our already very, very large universal taxonomy. So what kind of looks like in practice is like, let's say I'm doing a usability test with someone. I always do sort of an introduction, sort of getting to know the user part before the actual usability testing. So that part of the script might be tagged with the universal tags and themes and things that we want to make sure we capture so that we can reuse it later. The usability testing part might be mostly project-specific tags, but maybe they say something in the course of usability testing about search, and which is like an existing process. And so then we bring in, something from the search part of our universal taxonomy, and then, so one source might have multiple different sort of universal tags versus project-specific tags. So I think I'm about up in my time, and I want to make sure everyone else has a chance to talk about their process as well too. But yeah, I'm really excited to see what questions people have, and yeah, excited to hear what everyone else handles taxonomies, because it's always really different.
Please post them in the chat. We'll do our best to seed them through to Katherine during the Q&A section. And next up, we have Mark. So Mark is a user researcher at Whisk, and he's going to give us an insight into his approach. So over to you, Mark.
Thanks, Liz. Yeah, so I'm Mark. I work at a recipe app called Whisk. Whisk is about 100 people, globally distributed, so remote first, and I'm the only researcher on the team. So I sit under design, which makes using Dovetail pretty interesting because I pretty much control the entire experience. I do all the tagging, and sometimes people visit Dovetail, but it's usually me kind of clipping and making insights and sharing things out. So the way I think about the taxonomy is mostly for my own understanding and navigation of things and concepts. I think I have a pretty similar setup to or approach that Katherine has. I think for me, the biggest thing has been using the universal or the extensions, which you can use across projects. Because I realized after a certain amount of time, I'd been doing a new project for each feature we were testing. There was a lot of concept testing and usability testing when I started on features that were kind of already in the roadmap. We had pivoted as a company, and so we became like a consumer-facing app instead of a more of like a grocery shopping list type app. So we suddenly became pretty user-focused and wanted to roll out a bunch of new things. So as much as the tagging has helped with like organizing things, there's also just a lot to do as a team of one. So my advice is the extension, but also like you're not gonna be able to tag everything the way that you want, especially not on the first try. So you just want to have enough tagging, at least for me, that helps you if you need to go back to find things that you need to find, to put things together if someone has a specific question. And for me, that's really included like using the extension so that I can just tag things across different projects. I can actually I can screen share as long as I'm not showing user data. All right. I can't tell if this is showing. Okay, it looks like it's showing. So I've basically put together each, so you can see this is like our, the universal extension that I have across all these projects. And so the way I've kind of put this together is this has not all come at once. These are basically different categories of things that over time have been tagged. And when I realized it kind of constituted its own column or its own kind of group, then it's made its way onto this extension. So you can see like some of the core features in our app. There's recipes, we have like communities and conversations. You can like review and follow people. So those are core things that I've been tagging across all of the different projects. So it doesn't get kind of siloed if I'm looking for what have people said about conversations or the activity feeds. It's not going to be in one specific project. This is going to, there's 42 instances here. You can see I've made one around like our concept of like utility. So just how the app actually works, like planning and shopping, saving. I ended up making one around like these kind of more abstract values like convenience or how people use their recipes and it fits their lifestyle, discovery, such. These are all verbs. So something like pressing a share button or the filter button. And you can see the numbers in these are like still kind of low in some instances, and that's because like I said, they're pretty new. I don't really have time to think of every possible tag in advance and then put them into the projects and see if they fit in. It's definitely more of a bottom-up approach. Sometimes, like if I'm working on this project here is like the recipe page project when we're doing a redesign, was able to kind of go through and think of all these things. Like I didn't use this title tag. You can see all the different components that we were using on a recipe. I use colors to kind of keep organizing and pull things up to the top. So like who created the recipe and where it's sourced from, like what website or blog it's been on, has been helpful. So I don't think there's really a right way to do it. This is just so that when I go through and I tag something, if I'm looking at a transcript, I can really quickly go to the category here that I know I'm going to be able to find the right thing. I'm not going to have duplicates. If I'm doing an onboarding kind of walkthrough, this covers the whole onboarding experience. There's username and password. I know exactly where everything's going to be. And then, of course, I do have an untitled group of things like I just haven't gotten to yet. People have mentioned, their families, or we haven't really focused too much on notifications yet. So it took me a little bit of time to kind of get over the, being a perfectionist and wanting to have the perfect system. But like Katherine said, it's kind of something that you're going to have to get over, like not having a final version or a final iteration. But yeah, I think the main thing is knowing, for me at least, where I can find all of these tags, so that I can, if a product manager or designer asks, like, what do we know about XYZ, I can search across all the different projects, and I can put in filters on any of these tags, and or logic. And so I think this is kind of like the big way I'm thinking about things. Can show you again, similar to Katherine, I have a project-based thing if it's really not going to be, if we're testing like different concepts and variants. So here again, this is the recipe page redesign. We had these new like ideas, this new like notes and review section, or featuring what communities is this recipe in. And these are things that weren't going to connect. They were very siloed to the project. So in that case, it's nice to have kind of on their own, but otherwise, I just like having a really organized group of tags. And this is a lot. Like, I'm not going to be using everything on everyone, but they're there, and I know that they kind of go across the projects. And I might even split this up at some point. So I recently added like a existing behaviors section. So if we're not looking at the app, if we're not talking specifically about how they're using the app, starting to get some, behavioral insights, like how are they thinking about ingredients and recipes. Now that I've gotten finally out from under the roadmap, there's some time to do some like basic, customer user interview understanding there. So this will just continue to evolve over time, but I'll probably leave it there and we can do Q&A later.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Again, if you have any questions for Mark, post them in the chat, and we'll see them through to him during the Q&A section. So now we're going to hear from Melanie. Melanie is a UX researcher at Vertex Incorporated, and Melanie's going to run us through her approach. So over to you, Melanie.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. So as Liz mentioned, my name is Melanie. I'm a UX researcher for a tax software company called Vertex, and I'm located in Philadelphia. I joined this team back in May, and Dovetail was still pretty new to the team at that time. So we're still in the experimental phase. Our team is pretty young still. We consist of 3 researchers, like 6 designers. Also, we are hiring. So today I wanted to speak to experimenting with tagging for everyone that might be new to Dovetail. I really like to tinker with things. So when I joined the team, the first thing I did was just dive straight into Dovetail. I wanted to know everything about it. I joined the Dovetail Slack community. I was setting up calls with other researchers. And I work directly with Dovetail customer service. I personally love Dovetail because it's collaborative and customizable, which is important to us because our team is still fairly young. So we get to work together to build out our repository in a way that works for us, especially as we continue to grow. We've been treating our tagging taxonomy like an experiment because that's what we know best. Like I said before, I spoke with loads of Dovetail users just to get a better understanding of how other researchers are using Dovetail. And that was helpful because it gave me some insight into different variations of tagging taxonomies. My work is very project-based, and a lot of my time is spent talking with SMEs and current users to gauge how they interact with our current products. Tax laws are really complex and they're changing all the time. So we wanted to seamlessly get that information to our users without any disruption. We're really into free tagging at Vertex. We don't have a formal or pre-written list of tags, and that's intentional because we want new ideas to emerge. This works for us because we're a small collaborative team, so that's something to keep in mind. When going through our interviews and notes, we tag anything that stands out to us, no matter how granular it is, because you can always go back and refine things later. A few times a month, we'll all meet to discuss Dovetail. We'll invite the designers as well, just to empower them to also use Dovetail with us. This allows us to identify what is and isn't sustainable for our team. Another researcher and I get together regularly to combine and define our tags, and that's been really helpful. I find that one tag can have a different meaning to everyone, so defining them has been extremely helpful for us. Recently, we began experimenting with extension tags just to capture data across all of our projects. I think that this is going to be something that's going to really benefit us down the road and save us from having to do a bunch of work that we've already done. I think this is going to also help us to notice patterns across our products and will allow us to cast a wider net across Vertex to gain more stakeholder buy-in. So like I said, our tagging structure is an experiment. We're learning every day. If you're in a similar boat, I would encourage you to try a different method for each project and see what works for you. I hope that was helpful. Feel free to hit me up on Slack if you want to talk more.
Lots of questions in the chat. This is amazing. I'm trying to mark them as questions so that we get to them in the Q&A portion. But if you could mention who you're asking the question to, that'll be super helpful for later. So last but not least, our final speaker today is Samaha. Samaha is a UX researcher at 1Password, and I'm super excited to hear about how she's tackling tagging taxonomy. So over to you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Liz. Yeah, super excited to be here and also learning a lot myself from everyone that has shared how they're using tagging their taxonomies and Dovetail. So I think that's super cool. For us, we're also fairly new, so in a very similar boat with Melanie, where we have a very young research team. I've been here at 1Password for a year, and we only recently started using Dovetail. And so we're really excited to use Dovetail and continue to have all the insights in one place that's accessible for the rest of the team and different stakeholders. So I'm noticing a lot. Hi, Yujin. Yeah, I'm noticing a lot of questions about communicating it with different people, and that's where we're at too. We really saw a need for Dovetail because it really centralizes all of the qualitative insights, which is not something we really focused on before. And so now on to how we approach tagging and taxonomy. So we're also very much project-based, like Katherine for some of her projects. And then similar to Melanie, trying to find what's right for us. So it's very much project-based. Right now it's myself and our very newly added new UX researcher. So we're really excited to have a growing team as well. So we're working on how best to tag these insights. At the moment, we're using what Dovetail already has in place, such as features, pain points, tasks. And then because we're very privacy focused, it's really, we don't know that much about our users. And so I've actually written a blog post on that, and I'll share that later. But we don't know that much. And so for us, it's really important to have a pragmatic approach, as well as understanding behaviors. And so tagging those behaviors is what's really important to us. The other thing that I'm considering, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Tom Sharon's article. So there he had mentioned putting together a list of global tags. And so that's likely to be the next step for us, is figuring out what are those global tags going to be. And that's most likely going to be our key features and attitudes. So those are the ones that are coming to mind right now, but we'll likely add on to that. And it'll evolve as well based on our usage. The other thing I wanted to share, and I wonder if I can upload a material, maybe not.
Should be able to. Is it like a PDF?
It's an image, a PNG.
You absolutely should be able to. If you head on over to the chat, there should be a plus sign in the bottom left-hand corner. Does that appear for you?
Yes. Maybe a handout? Okay, perfect. Okay.
And anyone who is looking for the article that Samaha's referring to, I've just popped it in the chat as well.
Thank you, Liz. Yeah, perfect. So that's exactly what I'm using to inspire and make sure we're researching other approaches as well. So in the handout, you can see that there's an inductive coding approach and a deductive one. And someone actually shared this in the Dovetail Slack community, so I think it was super helpful. Essentially, in some projects, we might already have an idea. For example, if it's a usability test that we're doing on an iteration of a previous usability test, which was already tagged, we might already have some ideas of key themes that might occur, features we're interested in evaluating, or patterns we're seeing. So when we have that idea, it makes it easier to tag it right from the start. And then the other approach is more discovery. So if we're doing, for example, interviews or something a bit more foundational and generative, then it's more like what Melanie said about free tagging, where you are starting with not having like a set, this is what we're going to tag with, but finding those out and discovering them. So yeah, that's how we're doing it right now. Yeah, and that's about it. So I'm really excited to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
I think we could head on over to the Q&A portion. We've got lots of questions, so I will just let you know who they're probably directed to. Some of them are directed to everyone, so I can let you know that as well. And if you want to jump in and answer them, I'll just, yeah, go off mute, I guess. I think I'll just start with the earlier question. So we've got a question here for Katherine. So do you have a governance group or some sort of help to manage what tags you're going to keep or drop or change?
Great question. It's the kind of question where I feel like the answer should be yes. But I mentioned earlier, like up until like literally 8 weeks ago, I was the only UX researcher on the team. So there wasn't really a need to, like, and I was the only person who was kind of coding or tagging the interviews or usability tests. So because of that, there wasn't really a need for us to get consensus in the same way that like Melanie talked about, for example, on like what different tags mean or what they are. I do collaborate with our data science team. So they have some input onto the tags because they will go into Dovetail and kind of use the counts next to the tags to sort of keep track of different sort of data science complaints or points of confusion that come up. So there's been some light collaboration with them on like, okay, what issues do you feel like are important for your own roadmap and prioritization? Like what things do you want me to keep an ear out for and keep track of? But not really any governance, so to speak. Just I think mostly because of the sort of maturity level of our team and nature of the way we're set up.
I might find one. I just had one and now it started again. Let me just grab it. This one's for Mark. Michelle is wondering whether you do any pre-planning before you start tagging, and like before you start building the taxonomy, and how you color code or use your tag names, etc.
Short answer. The color coding specifically is just for my like visual distinction, because you can see when you start tagging a transcript that you have the tag and the colors. So just when I'm going through, it's easy to see like, have I hit this from a couple different angles? Have I talked about this? Does it fit into the verbs or the actions? Does it fit into the core concepts? And just kind of keeping it like visually interesting or easy to understand for me. Besides that, I'm really just like, once I start seeing patterns, like, okay, I've collected a couple different tags here, like I see this coming up, then maybe I'll make a whole new column for it, and then we'll see how much it's used. To be honest, not a lot of time for planning the taxonomy as much as like planning the actual research, working with the designer and product manager to like figure out what's going to be tested, what we're learning, and the tagging just kind of happens as I go along.
Just looking through the questions. So Melanie, where do you manage or store your tag definitions?
We use, when you go into Dovetail, there's an option to give a description to each tag. So we do that. But we also have a list of all of our tags and descriptions just in a running Google Doc, just to keep us organized as well. So that's what's worked for us so far.
Awesome. And this one is for Samaha. How would you define global tags across multiple applications? So the feature set varies in the case of multiple applications, but there could be some common tags.
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are definitely a lot of features that are common throughout our apps. And so defining those and finding those, and also learning about the roadmap for all of our apps, that's really important to look into, and seeing which ones are there for each of the different ones, which ones aren't there, and then defining those. I think what's also important is knowing how each team refers to a feature. So there might be some variations in naming, and if someone is going to, so one of the important things for me is whoever is going to search for an insight, when they do that, they're able to find what they're looking for. And so if there are variations of a feature or how it's named, then accounting for that is going to be key as well. So I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
So feel free to jump in. So we've got from David, product managers, designers, and executives may or may not understand the business case for tagging. Have any of you needed to get buy-in from executives to justify why you need to spend time on tagging? No? Has anyone ever needed?
I luckily haven't. Oh yeah, go ahead, Melanie. My answer is no, so yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, we haven't had to get buy-in for tagging.
No.
We're lucky in that sense, I guess.
No, that's awesome. Okay, perfect. So I'll just hop on to another question that's, again, for anyone on the panel. So how do you deal with moving between the first cycle and the second cycle of coding methods using Dovetail? So merging tags can't be undone. So it seems like iterating would need to be done with caution. Do you want to answer this one,
Yeah, I
Katherine?
can try. So it sounds like it's asking, like I definitely have a lot of experience with merging tags because I mentioned I've reviewed our taxonomy numerous times since it began. And I feel like there's no penalty for waiting and seeing. Like if you're not sure whether two things are merged, like you can always that's my sort of approach, is to wait and see and just get more data, wait till you do more interviews or usability tests or whatever it is you're doing. And if I haven't always had this luxury, but I imagine if you're still on the fence, like talking with someone else who's familiar with the space and saying like, hey, this is how I think about it. I feel like these two things should be merged, but does this sound right to you? Like, do these two things mean the same thing to you? And just kind of doing it in a collaborative way is how I would approach it.
For the entire panel, but I might get like a thumbs up or a thumbs down to know who to direct it to. Does anyone use fields in Dovetail currently? Awesome. I might send this over to Samaha. So what are some of the best practices for using fields? And do you use all of this, do you use it for data, insight, and person fields, etc.?
And I might not be using it to the full potential of it, but just to confirm, fields are the top area for example, when you click into a card and then you see like note type or participant, correct? Perfect.
Yes. Yeah,
so
absolutely.
How I currently use it is definitely to tag the participant if they're in our people list in the interview date, as well as any observers or note takers that were part of the session. So that's how I use it for some key sort of items that we want to keep in mind for that particular session, for example. And then any other useful information about the feature itself, or whether it's a usability or another type of test, then that information is usually in the title of the project itself. So that's how I sort of the hierarchy I have at the moment. But I'd be curious to hear from others as well how they use fields.
That is correct. So yeah, I mostly use them to capture aspects of the actual user that we're talking about. So, and like this predates the people feature of Dovetail. But so for example, I'll have like the persona that the person is associated with. What else? The sort of user type, which is separate from the persona, but that's something that we have. The company, the person's name, just like things like that that we may want to sort of look up notes on later or segment on later. And as far as that's for sort of like our interview things. For our feedback things, like things that come in as emails from account managers or customer success folks, some of the other fields we have there are like the status of the item, because we sort of review all the feedback and get back to the person who submitted every month, which is its whole other process. So we've tagged like, is this an item that's being worked on right now? Is it in the backlog? Is it something that is something we're just frankly never going to get around to? And that's a more unconventional way of using Dovetail, I know, but it's worked really, really well for us. So that's another way that we use fields. Yep.
It's more of a community-based question. So how did you find other user researchers who were using Dovetail to speak with, or was it word of mouth through friends, or did you message them on LinkedIn in the Dovetail community or another community and ask them what they use for their repository?
Yeah, this is a great question. I've met a lot of people through the Slack community, and people in the Slack community have put me in touch with other people that they work with who are not in the Slack community who also use Dovetail. I have met people through Dovetail webinars and have had phone calls with them. I haven't really tried LinkedIn, but the Slack community has been great in meeting people.
Didn't pay her to say that, just letting everyone know. So the next question I've got is, it's probably around more of a collaborative approach. I've just lost it again, which, yeah, here it is. Does anyone have any advice for communicating your taxonomies with design, engineering, and product managers so that you all speak the same language? I see you nodding, Katherine, so feel free to jump in if you've had experience or and have any advice.
Yeah, I was nodding because I was more thinking of the process of onboarding this new researcher that we just hired, and the thought of onboarding her to our universal taxonomy, which is huge, was really daunting. So the tactic that I took with her, actually, I know this isn't maybe the same as how a PM or an engineer would use it, but I actually just had her start categorizing things, and twice a week we would go over everything she categorized, and I would kind of correct her if I knew there was a better tag. But it was also really helpful for me in helping finesse the taxonomy, because she would choose something that isn't what I would have chosen, and I'd be like, oh, but I can see how you would do that. Maybe we should rename this tag to something that's a bit more clear. When it comes to PMs, that's been more of an like typically when our PMs go into Dovetail, they do keyword searches. I'm still encouraging them to try and use tags because they just frankly capture more than a keyword would. So my advice for that, and what I've done so far, and it's still like an ongoing process, is again, just sort of like reminding them that it's a thing, and walking them through and showing them like, here's how I would answer this question that you have about Dovetail. Like, next time try it and let me know if you still can't find anything, then I can jump in. But yeah, I guess since I'm a UX research team of one, my go-to thing is like, try it yourself, and if you have trouble, we'll talk about it after.
Thumbs up or a thumbs down around extension tag uses or extension boards. Obviously, people have mentioned it. So who uses extension boards? Pretty good turnout on that one. Mark, I might send you this one. So for global tags set up through extensions, do you have a best practice for sharing out findings and collating them from studies under the same tag? This is quite a long question, so I'll just shoot that part over.
Because insights are at the project level, and often the reason I use extensions is because sometimes the insights are coming from really multiple projects. So the way I've started thinking about sharing the synthesis that I've done, or things that stakeholders want, they rarely want to see the taxonomy, or like maybe I send an individual clip, but they really expect, like when I send them a link, that it's like a full-fledged like here's a statement, here's like 5 clips I can back it up with. And so I've started using like higher and higher level like components, I guess. So I'm trying to use the stories to tell a story in effect. And so that might, sometimes I'm like kind of skipping the insight level even. I'll like have a question I'm looking at, like how do people evaluate recipes, like whether or not they want to save the recipe or make that recipe. And so from within a story or within an insight, you can insert things from the bottom, you can insert like a tag or a highlight. And that's where I make use of the extension, because you can pull from anything, or I'll go from search and you can filter by any of the tags there. And then from there, you can also add them to a story. Yeah.
Thank you. I might ask Samaha this question. So do you split a tag out when it gets to a certain number of highlights? And how do you handle tags that get to a large number of highlights?
That's a great question. I will say, because we are at the stage we're at, we have a few projects in there, more of the recent ones. And so for us, we're still at the point where when we do create an insight or a story for a particular, let's say a tag, just one tag. And so we're still at the point where it's enough for us to be able to scan through and see what we need and what we don't within that story, for example, or the relevant insight for that specific project. Yeah, so I wouldn't say we've had the need to split up a tag yet, but that is a very interesting question. And maybe I can chat about how some of those interesting things we found while tagging, if that's okay. Yeah. So one of the things that I have found is that while tagging, for example, like specific features or specific behaviors or anything that's interesting, sometimes we have, or a lot of times we have new insights that come up. And so for those, we need to create new tags. And sometimes we don't know how best to tag that. And so sometimes it can be a long sentence, although I try to not to be that long. And then understanding where to put that becomes like a point of discussion. Yeah, I went off on a bit of a tangent, but that's where my mind went.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. I again, I might do a thumbs up, thumbs down, but is there a time when you archive or sunset insights within a particular tag? So if there is a time that you can remember, give a thumbs up, and if there isn't a time, give a thumbs down. Awesome. Katherine, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, so I've archived whole tags. I don't think I've ever, like if I remove something from a tag, it's to tag it to something else. But the instance in which I've done that, we used to have these, I mentioned I joined, we were in the process of sort of recreating these products. And then eventually we retired the old versions of those products. So there was a point at which I kind of combed through and found everything that was sort of related to a feature of that product, like the sentiment tags about like needs and overarching pain points I kept, because those are still relevant no matter what the product is. But anything that was related to like specifically how people downloaded something in the old product, or specifically how they logged into the old product, any pattern that didn't exist anymore, I went through and tagged those all to just like a tag that's, and I color code them similar to Mark, I guess. And so now they're in a gray tag that has the name of this old product. And so I know like that's, and they're in their sort of own retirement board, so to speak. So that's how I've like undone stuff. And thinking on it, I actually do think I probably went through and moved things from other tags into that sort of retirement section. So yeah, they're all gray now.
Cheers. So this question's for Mark. You mentioned being wary of duplicates. And Joseph says, I often find myself producing very similar tags that tend to blend and become vague, which complicates my process when I come back to pulling out insights. Do you have any particular methods for avoiding this?
That is great timing. I actually just typed up a response for this in the chat. So I don't ramble. I will post it and then just read it out loud. But I think this is this is bound to happen, just like bottom up, to create new things that you see. And then in order to keep them from duplicating, as soon as I recognize them, I'll pull them into the same column and I'll make them the same color. And there, it means I'm not gonna lose them. And if I can't distinguish them, like if there's like one's a review and one's a rating, and I haven't figured out conceptually what the difference is yet, then at least I can search. If I'm searching for highlights or searching insights, I can include both of them. So it's like, let me cover things that are learning and discovery, because I'm trying to get some higher level concept there. But I would say, like, visually, like, put them on the same board, put them in the same column, and make them the same color. And then if and when you do figure out what the difference is, then use the descriptions.
Another question for you, Mark. So did you try to bring PMs and designers into Dovetail? What was their feedback? And because Anastasia is just trying to bring in key stakeholders at the moment.
But for me, for whatever reason, people are not going into Dovetail themselves. Beginning that kind of bothered me, was I'm like, look at all this research you'd want to utilize. And then I realized, if other people are playing around with creating tags and insights, then I lose like perspective, and that's really where I like to be comfortable and live. And so, like I said, I think in a previous answer, like I really try to use like high level actionable things, so that the PMs and designers don't need to go digging around for the data themselves. Sometimes if I really don't have the time for doing research on something, or if someone asks like, hey, what do we know about reviews, I can say, well, you can look up the review tag, and they know basic functionality. But otherwise, I really like to throw things in our Slack, or show things that are like full, like writing in complete sentences, basically. Instead of using bullet points, it just comes down to like, here are 3 people that said X, Y, Z. Here's the insight. Here are the clips. And once they realize that like this is helpful information, then maybe they'll be more receptive next time to click on a Dovetail link, even if it's just like, hey, here's a tag and here's some instances of it. So I think you really have to provide value up front, to show them like, here's important information, here's why it's relevant. And then after time, then they might start coming into Dovetail more. But it's kind of up to you as a researcher to organize that information and synthesize it in a way that is helpful for the designers and the product managers.
So does anyone tag sort of past research? Does anyone look backwards, or is it always sort of a forwards moving? Okay, cool. I might shoot this one over to you, Katherine. How do you approach going back to tag past research?
Great question. So yeah, when we first started using Dovetail, I actually like copied and pasted all of our old notes from past interviews and tagged all of them, just because I knew there was so much good content in there, and I wanted to make sure that it was easily accessible kind of moving forward. So I mentioned, so for us, we already had this universal taxonomy that was built up from feedback. So I found that most of the stuff in the past research was already represented in the feedback. And so we didn't run into a lot of situations where there was something completely completely new or like a theme that was completely new that needed to be represented. It was sort of like, okay, I've heard of this category of thing more, like maybe we need a new specific tag within this category. So yeah, my whole process is everything's evolved from the ground up based on need. Like, so if there was a theme that I thought was interesting or important, even if it was the only time I've heard it, I created a tag for it. And then that sets you up that if you keep hearing that theme going forward, that you have a sort of a collection center for it. So for me, I don't get too hung up on like necessarily how many things are in each theme, because I like to leave the door open for that theme to emerge from conversations I might have. And same thing with really large themes. I know someone asked this, or large numbers of things in a tag. I know someone asked this earlier. I actually find that really powerful and like as ammunition, as I like to call it, for getting PMs to accept that something is a theme that needs to be addressed or an issue that needs to be improved. It's like, hey, look, like 80 people have been talking about this. Maybe we should consider like bringing it into the roadmap. That was a bit of a tangent, but I was just reminded of it from earlier. So yeah.
Really appreciate everyone tuning in, and the absolute biggest thanks to the panel for giving us their time. We're really lucky here at Dovetail to have such an incredible community. So thank you to everyone. We're pretty interested in hearing what topic we should be focusing in on in our next community panel. So if you head on over to the polls section on the right-hand side of your screen and vote for the topic that you think we should be focusing on, that would just be great. We're also hosting another Tagging Taxonomies community panel next week. This time it'll be a little bit different. We won't be hearing from people different organizations. We're going to have 3 researchers from the same organization who will be outlining their different approaches to tagging taxonomies. So I think it'll be a really interesting session. I've sent, should have popped up on your screen throughout the session, and please sign up. I think it'll be great. And if you want to continue the conversation or ask any further questions, head on over to the Dovetail Slack community. We'll be hanging out for a while. And again, I can't thank the panel enough. Really stoked with the time you gave us today. So we look forward to seeing you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.